Dom and Johnny in the morning. Okay, I have no idea how deep this rabbit hole is going to go, but I just was so curious what your thoughts are. So yesterday I had a conversation with a parent who has a background in martial arts, trained a few different styles, and they asked me from a martial arts perspective what I thought of the combinations. And I asked for more context because any of these things, I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And what they clarified was just from their martial arts experience, it feels like a lot of the combinations either have gratuitous movement or they're excessive in the sense that, like, you've already done a disabling move, but it seems like you keep going. And it seems unrealistic to practice against a right-handed punch. So what were my thoughts on that? And I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, man. I feel like I always get put in the hot seat first. So 108 combinations. First and foremost, that is a lot of combinations.
Yeah.
Most styles do not have that many.
Gratuitous is probably an accurate word.
It is. So I've struggled with this a lot myself, and more just to kind of get to the bottom of what I thought was, the benefit of practicing forms versus combinations, and do they have the same function, and one's just longer, or is there a specific reason for both? But not to complicate things and just to hone in on the combinations. I feel like they are two things, and one is principle specific, and two is fight applicable. And I did have a conversation with Master Capozzo not too long ago, and he did say that every combination should be fight applicable. It should be very practical in self-defense. However, Master Capozzo will often cite what attack the combination was designed to be from.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting part. So, and that will bring you back to the first, was that the first or second question, but why do we do it all off a right front punch? Well, that is for the sake of practice. It is so you can hop in a technique line, and you don't have to ask everybody what combination they're doing before you punch in. You can just punch in and start working, because most of what's in the combination has less to do with that first initial move and more to do with the other thing that's going on, with the exception of things that involve, like, 16, where you're actually getting just out of range. It doesn't really matter what strike is thrown, because if you're using that principle, you're getting just out of range. If they're swinging back for a wild hook, getting just out of range is slightly different. If they're throwing a front kick, getting just out of range is slightly different. So, but the meat and potatoes of the combination is how you manipulate the body, throughout the front to back, the combination, in my opinion. And then what was the other question? It was why off a front punch?
Oh, a lot of the movements seem gratuitous.
So some of that, from my understanding, actually, this was another conversation I had with Master Rob Whitney, and he was talking about the fact that some combinations were designed specifically to get students used to violence. And this sounds like a ridiculous concept. Why would you want students used to violence? But the point is, if you did have to defend yourself, especially in a life-threatening situation, you would have to use a pretty significant level of violence. And getting used to violence is hard, because we don't want to teach children that violence is the answer. But sometimes violence can be the answer. In a life or death situation, violence is the answer, unfortunately. Unless you're at a level where you have superseded your attacker so far that you can almost play with them at that point and not hurt them. And that's why we continue to train in this system. The better you get at it, the more, an attack seems more like, oh, that's kind of cute, compared to, I'm about to get hurt and I need to defend myself and my family. So the best examples are 11 combination. 11 combination is an absolute overkill, and I was told that combination is designed to teach students to get used to the concept of violence. And then same with 4 combination was the other one that was
Yeah,
designed
I
to
think
be
that
way.
one is probably the most relevant, because just thinking of the individual and where their child is at on the journey, like 4 is probably the most recent one they've learned that has that kind of like overdone feeling.
Yeah. But the underlying principles are still there, and principles can stack. In the case of 4 combination, there is, fighting to the finish, the overkill, getting used to violence, but there's also getting used to applying one of the natural strikes, which is pretty cool. You get to see how you can manipulate someone with a block, and then, as you get higher, you can do that natural strike in 2 different ways to have 2 different outcomes. It's pretty cool. So there's a lot of really cool principles laced in them. It is fight applicable, and practiced off a front punch just because sometimes that's easier to practice that way.
Yeah, I think all of that is rooted in the history of the system and the philosophy of what Fred Villari wanted to convey, especially given the context of, the situation I was speaking to. My answer had to more do with the gross motor skills that the student was learning because they're a child. So it was really interesting, actually. There was a different parent recently that said that our style was specifically recommended for kids. And I thought that was just an interesting thing. I had never heard that before. Yeah. It is kind of cool. But, I can't understand, if you have a martial arts background, you've done some training yourself, you're watching a 7-year-old learn our style, a lot of the combinations start to look kind of goofy. And they look very kind of stiff and robotic almost at first because they're learning a new vocabulary of movement. And that's what I put. I said, right now, the combinations are teaching a vocabulary of movement, just like how yoga teaches a vocabulary of movement. That's actually language I've heard both from a yoga instructor, Adrian on YouTube, and Fred Villari from his book, Martial Arts in Real Life, or Hidden Beneath the Shadows, whichever printing you got. When I teach adults, like we have a new adult that started last Thursday, one of the things I was very clear about is you need to defend yourself, right? You're taking this 45-minute class. These are the things that are very simple and will probably make the difference. Your wrist release, 8-point blocking system, maybe, probably the first 4. Like the last 4 are even a little more situational. Palm heel front kick. Really, if against most attackers, because the far majority of the world has no martial arts experience, that's pretty much what is going to give you the greatest probability. So, even against the right-handed front punch, the right-handed front punch is probably an unrealistic attack. And most people that are just going to swing probably aren't going to have great rhythm. It's going to be one attack, or if there's a follow-up, it'll be like a 1-2, but probably unlikely even to be like a 1-2, where it's like kind of like a quick thing. Like if they have some boxing experience, now we're getting into a different thing. But again, there's only so much you can teach in 45 minutes or an hour. So the combinations now start to give you even more tools so that as an attacker that may have more experience is factored into the equation, now you're more likely to do something that will disrupt them so that you can get away. So, and especially in the context of kids, part of it is, especially for some of the more dangerous stuff, you do have to veil it a little bit unless a specific parent wants their kid to learn a specific skill. So I will say, I'm just pulling this number out of the air. Like 95% of our parents don't want their kids to become great fighters. They want them to become great people. The martial arts is an awesome physical and philosophical way to achieve that. And they know that their kid can probably stay safe, again, with a block or a palm heel or something, if it even comes to that. And even amongst kids that have trained with us, that have ended up in like a physical conflict, especially with another kid, usually it's a 1 or a 2 block is the thing that successfully ends the conflict. So yeah, so from more of like a health and wellness perspective and what's appropriate based on our demographic, that I find to be the function of the combinations for kids. For adults, again, I do think that the martial arts features many counterintuitive movements that if someone has no training, it's the combinations are going to start to give them some tools that will make them more effective fighters, but it might take a little while for the program to install. With someone with a martial arts background, I think a lot of the combinations have principles that may be counterintuitive to their reference of their knowledge of other martial arts, which is kind of the point. You know, if you have someone that's like a really strong Taekwondo practitioner, you don't want to try to meet them with Taekwondo. You want to learn principles that are going to disrupt their ability to use their preferred skill set. So a lot of times, you know, when you look at a combination, you're like, that's kind of funky. You know, it's not just out of nowhere. It's probably built as some kind of counter to something.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, too, because there's not a lot of systems where, I mean, if you watch Master Filari move, a lot of times, at least most of the time, he almost is trying to get to the C's. You know, he's trying to get to the point where he can seize and control. And then after he does that, you know, maybe he kicks him as he's throwing him off, you know. But, you know, sometimes you'll see him, you know, hit, you know, just use hands and just use feet. But I would say the majority of the time that I've seen him moving, especially in, you know, the White to Black series or like that old video, Fred Villari Cuts Loose, which was, I think, just a clipping together of him in the White to Black series. A lot of times he's going in for some sort of seize. So, and that's probably really abnormal for a predominantly kicking art or a predominantly boxing art, like, you know, like boxing. I meant punching art.
Yeah, that's okay.
A predominantly boxing art, like punching.
Yeah.
So, and it probably would seem a little bit more natural to someone cross-training from wrestling or cross-training from jiu-jitsu, because they have that same mentality as, I'm out here and I want to be next to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that would be kind of jarring to learn those combinations and be like, what am I doing?
Yeah, and the reality is, if you watch a master, and by master I mean like not me, like the ones that have been masters for a while, if you ask them to do a combination, it may look nothing like what we're teaching to like a blue belt or a green belt, because they're so fluid and they're just instinctively able to adapt their footwork, their shape, their targeting, all those variables to match what their opponent is giving them. So it may be even slightly unrecognizable as that combination, but it's because, like you said, the combination is designed to convey a principle, usually one that's both physical and mental. So like you said, 11 combination, the mental principle is tapping into violence. The physical principle is blending the 4 ways of fighting. So a lot of combinations have that. And also, for kids, they can barely comprehend move the right arm, not the left arm. So like it's going to overload them and be unproductive to try to be like, well, 4 combination is the tiger, and what you're doing is using your center of gravity. They don't know that. They need step the right foot back. No, the right foot. Your other right foot. Like that's what teaching kids is like. And until they get the practice so that their body's doing it without their mind having to command it, now their mind is a little more open. They've got some RAM available in order to start downloading a new program.
Yeah.
So teaching adults and teaching kids is going to be very, very different.
True. And even though they kind of start in 2 different places, they both get the benefit of these combinations having an evolutionary pattern.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing that makes them kind of unique too, is, they're set to be taught a certain way, and then as you get like the beginner ones, 6, 7, 3, 5, 2, and then all of a sudden you're a purple belt, and you're learning purple belt principles, and then you're raising these beginner techniques to intermediate versions, for the purple, blue stripe. Then you get to green, and then you're taking all those beginner and intermediate ones and raising them to a new level where it evolves and it has slightly different principles, which is pretty neat too. Very different from like a karate, or like a traditional karate where they have wazas, Japanese for techniques, and those have no evolution. It is just about perfection.
Yeah.
You can't perfect a combination in this style. Impossible, because it's going to keep changing on you consistently, and that's a pretty neat thing. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and to speak to the evolution that you just brought up, one of the things we frequently say, even to kids, is you're a blue belt. A blue belt 6 combination should be kind of different than a white belt 6 combination. Yeah. If you're doing 6 combination as a blue belt the same way you were doing it as a white belt, something is wrong. You should not have been promoted. Yeah. So, and even there is a refinement stage, making sure that you're forming the foot correctly, making sure that you're chambering the knee correctly. Like, there's that refinement. But then there's also the evolution and the possibilities opened up by things like targeting, Mm-hmm. So if you're a white belt, we teach you basically flat of the stomach, right? Even that is probably not the most effective life or death self-defense target. If you were a kid and needed to use it on another kid, the stomach has some layer of protection. Might knock the wind out of them, but it's not going to require surgery. In terms of physical development, it ensures that you're kicking high enough so that you're refining your stability. So if anything, it's like it's a gate lock on making sure that you're not hurting people too fast, and also you're ensuring the health and wellness component and forging the vessel. So when you get to 8 combination, which involves 2 kicks without putting your foot down in between, you've built the stability so that now you can do something different with it. That being said, as you get higher in rank, you start to earn the privileges of learning better targets. So like the shin is an amazing target to hit. If you've ever banged your shin against a coffee table, now imagine someone kicking it really hard. It's going to be a bummer. The knee, the inside of the thigh, the groin, all these different things. It's one thing to be able to lift your knee up and push your foot out and form it properly. It's another thing to be intentioned about your targets. So again, 6 combination may look different, like 5 different repetitions if you're aiming for 5 different targets to get 5 different effects. So, and that's, I think, the beauty of principle-centered teaching. It's not, I do this way every time. It's what's going to make sense given the situation. And I will say there have been a few times, I can probably count them on one hand, where parents come to me and said, I really want my kid to learn this very practical, violent thing because I'm worried about like a kidnapping scenario or something. If they come to me and they say that, it's like, fine, let's teach them the thing because that's what you want them to learn. But it tends not to be our default because, again, the gross majority of kids especially, they don't have the wisdom to always use it appropriately. So we just want to make sure that, it's very clearly understood what you use what knowledge for. I guess to speak to the always punching with the right side, again, that's for a predictability thing. In our last podcast, we talked about zone 2 training. And basically, there are different levels of intensity that you can train at. And, cardiovascular training, they've been finding for MMA, this idea of quote-unquote zone 2 training where you are kind of taking it easy 80% of the time to make sure that your mechanics are sound is what's leading to the most success. Otherwise, you over-rev the nervous system and it actually becomes less effective over time. It's kind of like someone at the gym who like overdoes it and doesn't spend enough recovery time. Mm-hmm. They end up like hurting themselves more than getting stronger. the right-handed punch for the first few ranks is really to make sure that the attacking partner is just in a safe place so that they don't accidentally trigger a reaction and get popped in the nose or something. And I find that, you narrowed it to combinations, but to speak to a wider practice, forms are really the internal vocabulary of movement. Combinations are the translation of positioning and targeting to learn, 3 combination. If I'm on the outside, I'm safer and have more leverage. 5 combination, if I'm on the inside, I have juicier targets, but I'm more at risk and need to be more alert. And then sparring is where you test it in real time. And even then, there are a lot of artificial safety rules to make sure that nobody gets hurt. But once you hit brown belt especially, that's where the theme of that rank is adaptability. So if you watch a brown or a black belt class with combinations, especially when we do a reaction drill circle, like you said, Master Garposo said, a lot of times that's where we start linking combinations to specific kind of attacks. They all pretty much work on like a front punch, but there are some, like 5 combination works great against a hook punch. 3 combination works really well against a back fist. 4 combination if someone's coming in overhead, or it's more of like a punch to the face rather than the body. That high block is going to be a lot more effective. So at earlier ranks, it looks kind of ridiculous, but it's because the body needs to learn where to go and what to do first. Then we can start linking it to different kinds of attacks at different rhythms and different timings, 1-2 punches, combinations off of a front kick, all that stuff. So I just think that this is a highly sophisticated system, and like anything, it's best to learn it one part at a time rather than trying to overteach too early, which in my experience slows down a student's progression. As for the 108, I think the most skeptical answer I can give, what I've been told, Fred Villari was a marketing genius, and he instinctively knew the inner workings of the Western mind. And so, in order to capitalize on our capitalistic economy, he created a curriculum-heavy system that would build anticipation no matter where you were at on the journey. So you and I have even joked, there are a few forms that only like a few masters know, and both of us are like, oh, wonder when we're going to get to see that one. If we're going to get to see that one, So, but like the idea of 108 combinations, that's more than you need. I would probably argue, really, you kind of need 4 or 5 of them, like as a core principle to become a pretty effective fighter. And you take those 5 base ones and you swap a few things out. You've mentioned before, 3 combination is the outside superior position. 15 combination is also the outside superior position with a different shape, That being said, I think especially the higher ranking combinations that start from the outside perspective looking goofier and goofier, they demand a kind of timing in order to work. And when you can get it, then your older combinations explode in effectiveness. So that's the other way to look at it, is because it is so curriculum heavy, there is almost no ceiling to how skilled you can get studying just this one style. Not that I am dissuading anyone from cross-training at all. I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has some amazing principles and techniques that complement this style well without necessarily distracting from it. But if you ever are looking at the syllabus and you're like, wow, that's a lot, it's because sometimes the function of the new stuff is to make you even better at the old kind of core material. Dom and Johnny in the morning. Okay, I have no idea how deep this rabbit hole is going to go. But